When you look at a weather map on the evening news, um, your eyes are immediately drawn to the bright colors.
Right, the reds and oranges.
Exactly. You see the deep reds of a thunderstorm, the localized lightning strikes, the heavy bands of rain moving across the screen.
Yeah.
It's immediate, it's highly visible, and it naturally commands all of your attention because it's happening right there in front of you.
Well, yeah, because it's urgent, right?
Right. But if you talk to a meteorologist, they'll tell you that to truly understand why that storm exists in the first place, you have to look away from the radar.
You have to look at the larger system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to look at the invisible ocean currents moving quietly underneath.
Hmm.
Those currents operate on a vast global scale. They're silent, they're slow-moving, but they are the structural forces that are constantly reshaping the entire global climate.
That is a highly effective way to frame the conversation we're having today. Because we are so often conditioned to react to the immediate localized events, the daily headlines, the urgent political debates, that we completely miss the underlying structural currents.
The forces that are actually driving the entire system.
Exactly.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you could join us.
Glad to be here.
Because today we are talking about one of those global currents, and that is the movement of people.
Right.
We tend to look at global immigration exactly like that surface-level storm. The conversation around it is highly debated. It's often extremely loud, and it focuses almost entirely on the immediate.
It does.
But our core question for you today is this. When we turn down the volume on the political rhetoric, and we just look at the hard, empirical, economic, and demographic data, how does the movement of people across borders actually reshape the communities you live in?
And to answer that question accurately, we have to completely bypass the opinion pieces and the daily news cycle.
Yeah, we have a lot of material today.
We really do. We are looking at an extensive stack of highly rigorous source material today.
Decades of it.
Right. We're examining decades of historical economic data. We're pulling from comprehensive landmark reports generated by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine.
And some working papers, too.
Yes, working papers published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, or the NBER, and we're analyzing highly localized case studies.
All over, right.
Exactly. Studies that examine everywhere, from rural agricultural hubs in the Midwest to the largest urban commercial centers in the country.
So we have all this data. The mission for us today is to take that mountain of research and trace the actual footprint of global immigration directly to your everyday life.
To make it tangible.
Exactly. We want to show you how these demographic currents touch absolutely everything around you.
Yeah.
We're going to explore the high-tech patents inside the smartphone you might be holding right now.
We'll look at the commercial vitality of your local downtown area, too.
Right. And we're even going to examine the long-term care facilities that are currently supporting our rapidly aging populations.
The overarching goal here is to really understand the mechanics.
Right.
We want to move beyond the simple concept of people moving from point A to point B.
Surface level view.
Exactly. We need to really look at the chemical reaction that happens in a local economy when new populations introduce different skills, different consumer demands, and different entrepreneurial risk profiles into an established community.
It's like we frequently fall into the trap of thinking about immigration purely in terms of physical labor, right?
Very often, yes.
Or simply filling existing job openings. But the sources we are analyzing today point to something entirely different when you look at the top tier of the economy.
They really do.
They show that foreign-born workers are heavily involved in actually creating the future of the economy through high-skilled innovation.
And the data paints a picture of systemic creation, not just labor participation.
Okay, let's get into that.
To really understand the mechanics of this, we should look at a foundational piece of economic research published in the American Economic Journal.
Oh, the Hunt and Gauthier-Lazelle paper.
Yes. The researchers, Jennifer Hunt and Marjolaine Gauthier-Lazelle, set out to measure the specific effect of skilled immigration on U.S. patenting.
And overall technological innovation, right?
Exactly. And their findings were stark immigrants patent at exceptionally high rates compared to the native-born population.
Let me push on that slightly because I want to make sure we understand the why here.
Sure.
Is there something inherently unique about a person who crosses a border that suddenly makes them want to file a patent? Or is there a structural reason behind that data point?
It is entirely structural, and it basically comes down to training and extreme specialization.
Okay.
The study points out that this elevated rate of patenting is largely because high-skilled immigrants are disproportionately trained in STEM fields.
So science, technology, engineering, and math.
Right. The U.S. immigration system, particularly the H-1B visa program and the pipeline of international students attending American universities, it acts as a highly specific funnel.
I see.
When you have a targeted concentration of people entering the country specifically to study or work in advanced engineering, computer science, or pharmacology, you naturally see a corresponding spike in the creation of new patentable technologies.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is not just a modern phenomenon driven by Silicon Valley or recent tech booms.
No, not at all.
We have data going way back that shows this exact same pattern.
We do, and, this historical perspective is crucial for understanding that this is a long-term economic law, not a recent trend.
Yeah, talk about that NBER study.
Yeah, there is a fascinating study published by the NBER by Burchardi and co-authors that looked at 130 years of immigration history across U.S. counties.
130 years.
Yes. The researchers did not just look at a 5-year snapshot. They tracked where immigrants settled historically, going all the way back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Okay. And then they measured the long-term economic dynamism in those specific geographic areas today.
Wait, so they are drawing a direct statistical line from where people stepped off a train in, say, 1890 to the economic output of those specific counties in the 21st century.
That is the exact methodology. And the findings proved that immigration has a positive causal effect on long-term local innovation.
Meaning it actually causes the growth. It doesn't just correlate with it.
Precisely. The places that received higher volumes of immigrants historically continue to show higher rates of patenting, higher average wages, and greater overall economic dynamism many decades later.
That's fascinating.
The structural current of that early immigration essentially baked a culture of innovation, risk-taking, and agglomeration into the local economy.
Let me stop you there and pose a counter-argument that I think is, very natural to have when looking at this data.
Go for it.
The assumption is that if you restrict the flow of talent from outside the country, homegrown innovation will just naturally take its place.
Right, the substitution effect.
Yeah, the market abhors a vacuum, right? If a foreign-born software engineer or chemical researcher isn't there to invent something, wouldn't universities just see that gap, push native-born students into those fields, and fill the void?
It is a very logical assumption. I mean, you are describing a standard market correction.
Right.
But the historical data tells a very different story regarding human capital.
Okay.
To see what actually happens when you cut off that flow, we can look at a 2026 paper by Corneo Costas, published in the Journal of Economic Geography.
The one that studied the 1920s quotas.
Yes. They studied the historical effects of the U.S. immigration quotas implemented in the 1920s. Those quotas strictly and suddenly limited the flow of immigrants into the country based on national origins.
That is a perfect real-world test case.
Exactly.
A very direct legislative restriction of the talent pipeline.
Yes, it serves as a natural experiment for economists. And if the theory held true that homegrown talent simply steps up and fills the void without a drop in output, we would expect patenting rates and technological advancements to remain steady.
Just driven by different native-born people.
Right, but the data shows the exact opposite. Innovation actually fell.
Really?
It declined significantly in the specific geographic places and in the specific technological fields that were most exposed to those 1920s quotas.
But why wouldn't the local population just pivot? I mean, if there is money to be made in a new technology and the foreign competitors are removed, shouldn't the local inventors thrive?
Because innovation doesn't work like a simple assembly line where any worker can just step in and pull the lever.
Oh, I see.
Innovation requires a critical mass of diverse knowledge. The homegrown talent did not simply replace the lost immigrant talent because they lacked the specific global networks, the alternative problem-solving frameworks, and the specialized knowledge that those immigrants were bringing.
So the whole pool shrinks.
Exactly. When you remove a significant portion of the talent pool, the overall capacity for invention shrinks. The hubs of knowledge lose their density, and the pace of discovery slows down for everyone.
It's like imagining a complex chemical reaction in the laboratory.
That's a good way to look at it.
Like if you remove the catalyst from the beaker, the reaction doesn't just find another equally efficient way to happen using the remaining chemicals.
No, it does.
It slows down entirely, or it stops. Or, to think of it another way, it's an intellectual cross-pollination.
Yes.
If you put a net over a garden and stop the bees from moving between the flowers, The garden doesn't just decide to pollinate itself. The overall yield of the entire ecosystem drops.
That concept of intellectual cross-pollination is exactly what economists study, though they use the term spillovers.
Spillovers, okay.
What's fascinating here is that immigrant inventors do not operate in an isolated vacuum.
Right.
A highly detailed 2022 NBER paper by Bernstein and co-authors looked closely at the contribution of high-skilled immigrants to U.S. innovation and specifically measured this effect.
And what did they find?
They found that immigrants generate direct patent output, which we already established, but crucially, they also generate what the researchers call productivity spillovers.
I want to make sure we ground this in reality. What does a productivity spillover actually look like in a Tuesday afternoon? In a real-world office or laboratory?
Well, it means that the mere presence of an immigrant inventor actually raises the innovative capacity and output of their U.S.-born collaborators.
Oh, wow.
Imagine you are a U.S.-born scientist working in a biomedical lab. You have your standard operating procedures, your educational background from an American university, and your specific way of approaching a protein folding problem.
All right, a standard toolkit.
Exactly. Then a highly skilled immigrant researcher joins your team. They were trained in a completely different academic environment. Perhaps they have access to a different network of international peer research.
They read different journals, knew different professors.
Yes, and so they approached the same protein folding problem from a slightly different mathematical angle.
And just by being in the same room, having coffee with them, debating the methodology on a whiteboard, your own perspective expands.
Yes, your own patent output goes up. Your own individual productivity increases because you are constantly exposed to new techniques and diverse cognitive frameworks.
That's really cool.
The data proves that they are essentially elevating the performance of the people around them.
Which completely changes the zero-sum narrative.
Completely.
Because the fear is often that the foreign-born researcher took a job that the native-born researcher could have had. But the data says they actually made the native-born researcher better at their job.
That dynamic is further supported by a separate 2022 study by Wigger that examined the sociology of these labs, specifically who collaborates with whom.
What did Wigger find?
The research found that high-skilled immigrants increase overall collaborative innovation. They do not crowd out native-born workers from the patenting process.
They add to it.
Yes, they act as nodes that pull native-born workers into larger, more productive, and more complex collaborative networks.
I really want you, the listener, to internalize this mechanism, because this isn't just an abstract theory debated in university economics departments.
No, it has very real implications.
This directly affects the competitiveness of the company you might work for right now.
Yeah.
It affects the companies in your retirement portfolio, the platforms you use to order your groceries, the software you use to log into your work computer.
We have a report from the American Immigration Council from late 2025 that analyzed the origins of the largest companies in the country.
Oh, the Fortune 500 data.
Right. They found that almost half of all Fortune 500 companies in 2025 were founded by immigrants or their children.
Almost half. That is wild.
The specific number from that report is 231. 231 of the Fortune 500 companies.
Wow.
That is an enormous structural segment of the American corporate landscape. These are companies driving millions of jobs and generating trillions in economic value.
Right.
And they originate directly from that exact intellectual cross-pollination and the unique risk profile of immigrant entrepreneurs.
It fundamentally shifts the way you view the tech sector and corporate growth.
It really does.
Now, we've been looking closely at the engine of the economy, the high-tech innovation, the Fortune 500 companies, the systems driving GDP growth from the top down.
Yes, the top tier.
But we need to look at the chassis. We need to look at the structural foundation that allows a society to function in the first place.
The demographic reality.
Exactly. Because the very demographic reality that makes any of this economic growth possible is currently shifting underneath our feet.
Rapidly.
The population is aging, and it is aging at a rate that is structurally unprecedented.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a very pressing, very human question: who is going to care for the generation that built the past?
This is perhaps one of the most critical structural challenges facing wealthy nations today.
Yeah.
And it's purely a matter of demographic math. We have a severe demographic imbalance. The baby boomer generation is advancing in age and requiring significantly more medical, cognitive, and daily physical care.
And the younger generation.
At the same time, the younger working age population is simply not large enough to meet that surging demand domestically.
And this is where the economic data intersects with deeply personal reality.
Very personal.
There is a 2026 NBER paper by David C. Grabowski that focuses specifically on this intersection. If we have this if we have the severe labor gap in healthcare, what does that actually do to the quality of care for an aging parent, and how does immigration impact that equation?
The Grabowski paper is a landmark study because it moves the conversation away from just wages and taxes.
Okay.
And it looks at the direct relationship between immigration and older adult mortality in the United States.
Mortality, like life and death.
Yes. They looked at health outcomes, hospitalization rates, and life expectancy. And the paper found a direct, measurable, and highly significant link.
What was it?
Immigration increases the supply of health and long-term care workers, which in turn improves access to care for elderly Americans, which ultimately lowers their mortality rates.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that. The data literally shows that in geographic areas with higher rates of immigration, older adults actually live longer and have better health outcomes.
They do.
Why? Is it simply a matter of staffing ratios in a nursing home?
Staffing ratios are the primary mechanism. When a nursing home or an assisted living facility is short-staffed, the quality of care degrades rapidly.
Sure.
Medications might be administered late, physical therapy sessions are skipped, dietary needs aren't monitored as closely, and the risk of falls or preventable infections skyrockets.
That makes total sense.
The Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City published a detailed economic bulletin in 2026 analyzing this exact labor dynamic.
And what do they find about the labor supply?
They found that the domestic labor supply simply cannot keep up with the demand for these healthcare workers.
But why is the domestic market failing to meet the demand? I mean, if there's a need for workers, shouldn't wages rise to attract native-born citizens to those jobs?
In a perfectly free market, yes. But healthcare, particularly elder care, is heavily constrained by Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement rates.
Government price ceilings.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Facilities cannot infinitely raise wages because their revenue is capped by government payouts.
Right.
So the wages remain relatively modest for work that is physically demanding, emotionally taxing, and often involves highly challenging hours.
It's a really tough job.
It is. The native-born population is aging out of the workforce, and younger native-born workers are choosing other entry-level fields over the direct care workforce.
So the system hits a structural ceiling.
It does.
Without immigrant workers willing to step into those roles, often because those wages, while modest domestically, represent a significant upward mobility opportunity compared to their home countries, the healthcare labor supply simply collapses under the weight of the aging-driven demand.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look beyond the clinical outcomes and the labor supply charts.
Right. There's a human cost.
There is a vast human element here. We can look at extensive data compiled by KFF, formerly the Kaiser Family Foundation, which examine the role immigrants play in this direct long-term care workforce.
Yeah.
The human element is that these immigrant caregivers are the literal reason older adults can remain safe in their own homes or receive adequate, dignified attention in a facility.
I want to focus on that family aspect. Because if a professional caregiver isn't available, if the local home health agency has a 6-month wait list because they can't find staff,
Right.
what happens to that elderly person?
Right.
The need for care doesn't just disappear.
No, the need is simply transferred. It falls to the family. It falls to the adult children, and the economic ripple effect of that is profound. When professional care is unavailable, adult children, most frequently women in their peak earning years, are forced to reduce their own working hours, step back from their careers entirely, and manage the intense, round-the-clock stress of providing complex care for a parent with dementia or physical mobility issues.
So by sustaining the essential long-term care workforce, immigrant workers are quite literally supporting your own family structure.
They absolutely are.
They are allowing the broader economy to function because family members aren't forced to abruptly exit the labor market to provide full-time elder care.
The reality is that without this specific labor force, the entire healthcare system, and by extension the labor participation rate of middle-aged Americans, faces severe structural vulnerabilities.
It's not just an isolated sector.
Oh, we are not just talking about longer wait times at a clinic. We are talking about a fundamental inability to provide safety to an aging population while maintaining the current workforce.
That is a sobering reality to grasp. And it perfectly illustrates how intertwined these systems are.
Very intertwined.
The shortage of care workers is acute, But as we move through the sources, it becomes clear that this is actually part of a much broader trend affecting nearly every physical sector you rely on.
Yes, across the board.
Let's look at the macroeconomic reality of filling critical labor gaps across the board.
To understand the macro picture, we have to look at industries where the domestic workforce is either shrinking due to demographics or actively transitioning away from manual physical labor.
Agriculture comes to mind immediately.
Agriculture is the most visible example. Extensive data from the USDA Economic Research Service clearly documents that the U.S. farm workforce relies deeply on immigrant labor.
Because native-born workers are moving away from it.
Right. As the agricultural workforce ages, and fewer young native-born Americans choose to pursue careers in seasonal farm labor, immigrants have become absolutely essential to the baseline functionality of food production.
And we're seeing the same data in construction, the hospitality industry, food processing, and logistics.
Exactly.
Now, this brings us to a critical juncture in our deep dive today. Listeners, we are about to discuss several sources that touch on very sensitive topics.
Yes.
We're talking about ICE enforcement surges, mass deportations, and border policies from the Trump administration. I want to be extremely clear about our parameters here. We are strictly looking at the economic data.
Purely the economics.
We are leaving the politics entirely aside. We are not taking a stance on the policies themselves, and we are not making any value judgments. We are acting purely as an economic calculator, looking at what the empirical research says actually happens to the math of a local economy when these specific enforcement actions take place.
And acting as that calculator is exactly what research institutions like the Brookings Institution, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and the Urban Institute have done.
What do they look at specifically?
When we look at their rigorous, data-driven analyses of immigration enforcement and deportation surges, we see distinct, measurable economic ripple effects that touch native-born populations in unexpected ways.
Okay, let's follow those ripples outward. What happens to the math of a local community when you suddenly remove a large segment of foreign-born workers?
Let's start with the foundational need housing.
A huge issue right now.
The Urban Institute, along with economic modeling reported in Fortune magazine, have extensively analyzed how mass removals impact the current construction shortage. Right now, the U.S. has a severe housing affordability crisis. The root cause is primarily a lack of supply. We simply cannot build homes fast enough to meet demographic demand.
So what happens when enforcement surges?
When you abruptly remove foreign-born workers from a local market, you severely deplete the construction workforce.
Because it's not just about having the capital or the permits. You might have the lumber stacked on the lot, you might have the land zoned and ready, but if you lack the framing crews, the roofers, and the concrete pourers, the development stalls entirely.
Exactly. The timeline for building a subdivision stretches from 6 months to 2 years.
Wow.
Housing supply constricts further, and when supply constricts while demand remains steady, it drives up rent and home purchase prices for everyone in that community, regardless of their background.
But let's look at the job market itself. Because the most common intuitive assumption is that if you remove an immigrant worker from a job site, a native-born worker simply steps in and takes that exact job, resulting in higher employment for the native population.
Right, that is the common assumption. But the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco looked precisely at that assumption in a 2026 paper. They studied local economies that experienced sharp, sudden drops in unauthorized immigration due to enforcement surges. They found that removing those workers actually slows local job growth for native-born workers.
Let me push on that because that feels highly counterintuitive to a lot of people.
It does.
The prevailing fear is that immigrants take jobs and lower wages for native-born workers. Don't economies have a fixed number of jobs? Like, if a factory has 100 jobs and an immigrant takes one, doesn't that leave only 99 for everyone else?
What you are describing is a deeply entrenched economic concept known as the lump of labor fallacy.
Lump of labor. Okay.
It is the mistaken belief that there is a fixed, static amount of work to be done in an economy, like a pie that can only be sliced into so many pieces.
Right, a zero-sum game.
But the comprehensive report from the National Academies of Sciences, along with decades of research by labor economists like Giovanni Perry, thoroughly debunks this fixed pie theory.
No.
Economies are dynamic, living ecosystems. When a population grows through immigration, the demand for goods and services grows concurrently.
Right, because that new worker isn't just a producer, they are a consumer.
Exactly.
They have to buy groceries, they sign a lease for an apartment, they buy winter clothes, they get a haircut. All of that consumption creates new demand, which requires new jobs to fulfill.
That is the demand side of the equation. But Perry's research goes even deeper into the actual mechanics of the workplace, exploring something called task specialization.
Task specialization. Break that down for me.
He found that immigrant and native-born workers most often complement each other, rather than substituting for one another.
Oh, interesting.
They bring different skill sets to the same business, which raises the productivity of the entire enterprise.
I really want to understand the mechanics of task specialization. Walk me through what that looks like on a real job site, say a mid-sized commercial construction company.
Okay, let's look closely at that construction company. You have a pool of native-born workers who have been in the industry for years, they speak fluent English, and they understand local building codes and client relations.
Right.
When immigrant workers enter that labor market, particularly those who might have less formal education or limited English proficiency, they often take on the highly manual, physically demanding, or routine tasks.
So they are doing the heavy lifting, the framing, the basic assembly.
Yes.
And the assumption is that they took those framing jobs from the native-born workers.
But that is not what the data shows happens.
What happens?
The influx of that labor allows the construction company to take on more contracts because they have the physical manpower to execute the builds.
The company scales up.
Exactly. This expansion does not push the native-born worker into unemployment. Instead, it allows the native-born worker to shift upward into communication-intensive, client-facing, or supervisory roles.
I see.
The native-born framer becomes the site foreman. They become the logistics coordinator, managing the supply chain. They move into project management, interacting with the architects and the clients.
So they specialize based on their comparative advantages. The native-born workers leverage their language skills and local knowledge to manage, while the immigrant workers provide the foundational labor.
And by specializing in these complementary tasks, the overall productivity and profitability of the construction business goes up.
The pie gets bigger?
Yes. The business expands, takes on more complex projects, and ultimately creates more jobs across the board, including administrative and managerial roles for native-born citizens.
That makes a lot of sense.
And the San Francisco Fed paper showed that when you enforce a sudden removal of the immigrant labor force, that business contraction happens in reverse.
Because suddenly the company doesn't have the crews to finish the builds they contracted.
Exactly. The business cannot operate at capacity. They have to cancel contracts. Their revenue drops sharply. And when the revenue drops, they can no longer afford the overhead of their management team, and they end up laying off the native-born project managers, the sales staff, and the administrative assistants as well.
So the loss of the foundational labor pulls the higher-tier jobs down with it.
It does.
That structural reality makes the economic fallout we see in other industries make total sense.
It's the same pattern everywhere.
We looked at data regarding the food industry.
Yeah.
If you pull the workers out of the meatpacking plants or the agricultural fields, the entire supply chain chokes.
Right.
The processing plant slows down, which means less product hits the market, which means prices at the grocery store spike for everyone. And the logistical companies that employ native-born truck drivers suddenly have fewer shipments to move, which cuts into their hours and wages.
The macroeconomic implications of restricting this flow are profound. A 2026 update from the Brookings Institution modeled the projections for falling immigration levels in 2025 and 2026.
What do they project?
They noted that when immigration falls, the economy suffers a dual contraction. It loses the necessary workers to produce goods and services, but it also loses millions of active consumers.
The demand side shrinks, too.
Yes. This dual loss slows overall GDP growth and heavily reduces consumer spending, which is the primary engine that keeps the U.S. economy running.
It's a fascinating, if sobering, mathematical reality. You can't just remove a piece of the engine without affecting the entire vehicle.
You really can't.
But let's bring this down from the macroeconomic clouds and look at the street level.
Yeah.
We've talked about immigrants working in big tech, in healthcare, and in agriculture.
Yes.
But they don't just fill open roles at existing companies. The sources show they're disproportionately the ones signing the leases and opening the doors to new, local businesses that anchor our communities.
This brings us to a crucial, highly visible aspect of immigration, which is the revitalization of local neighborhoods.
Neighborhood revitalization.
The American Immigration Council has published several detailed reports looking specifically at mid-sized cities and regions across the Rust Belt.
So places that have historically struggled.
Right. These are geographic areas that have historically faced severe industrial decline, decades of population loss, and an aging demographic base that threatened the survival of the municipalities themselves.
We're talking about places where the large manufacturing plants closed in the 1980s or 90s, the young people moved away to bigger cities for opportunity, and the traditional Main Street became a ghost town of boarded-up storefronts.
That is the exact profile. The reports highlight specific towns where this narrative of inevitable decline has been forcefully reversed.
Which towns did they look at?
We have detailed case studies on places like Worthington, Minnesota, Charleroi, Pennsylvania, and larger mid-sized cities like St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay.
In these communities, immigrant-owned Main Street businesses have become the primary driving engine of civic revitalization.
What does that revitalization actually look like when you look at the municipal ledger? I mean, how does a new population save a struggling town?
Well, it starts with commercial real estate. Empty, depreciating storefronts are suddenly leased, renovated, and brought up to code.
They bring them back to life.
Right. A new bakery opens, a specialized grocery store, a local logistics firm, a dry cleaner. These businesses start paying local commercial property taxes and collecting sales tax.
Which the town desperately needs.
Furthermore, the previously declining population graph suddenly ticks upward, stabilizing the housing market.
So what does this all mean for the native-born residents who never left?
It means the survival of their civic infrastructure.
Wow, survival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If a town's tax base shrinks too far due to population loss, the municipalities simply cannot afford to provide basic services. They can't pave the roads, they have to cut funding to the public schools, and they struggle to maintain fire and police departments. The influx of immigrant entrepreneurs and their families essentially rescues the municipal ledger, injecting the necessary capital to keep the town functioning for everyone.
But there's a twist in the data regarding entrepreneurship that I found truly counterintuitive.
The UNIL study.
Yes, we look at a 2025 study by Bill and Unell, published in the journal Small Business Economics, that examined how this wave of immigrant entrepreneurship affects native-born Americans who might want to start a business.
It is one of the most compelling findings in the recent literature.
Because my intuition, and again, thinking about the lump of labor fallacy we just talked about, tells me that if immigrants are coming in and opening lots of businesses, native-born Americans might open fewer.
Right, the saturation fear.
Yeah. You would assume the market gets saturated, the competition for storefronts gets too high, and the native-born population backs off.
But the data shows the exact opposite occurs. Unell's comprehensive study found that an influx of immigration actually boosts entrepreneurship rates among U.S.-born residents in those same areas.
But why? Why would native-born residents suddenly decide to take the risk of starting a business just because new people move to town?
It comes down to the creation of a vibrant, high-velocity economic ecosystem.
Okay, explain that.
When a town has been in decline, there is a pervasive sense of economic pessimism. Nobody wants to risk their life savings opening a restaurant in a town where the population is shrinking every year.
Obviously not.
But when you have an influx of immigrant labor and families, you suddenly have a larger consumer base with fresh demand for goods and services. You have increased local economic activity, more foot traffic on Main Street, more suppliers making deliveries, money changing hands more frequently.
It creates a rising tide.
Exactly. U.S.-born residents see this revitalized environment. They see the increased demand, they see the boarded-up windows coming down, and the economic pessimism lifts.
They feel optimistic again.
They suddenly feel confident taking the leap to start their own businesses to serve that growing, dynamic community. The immigrant entrepreneurs act as the spark that reignites the entire local commercial engine.
I want you to picture your own downtown right now.
Yeah.
Think about your local commercial district, whether it's a bustling city avenue or a small town square.
Yeah.
The diverse restaurants, the corner grocers, the small manufacturing shops, the local accounting firms. Local business formation is a primary driver of regional economic growth.
It is.
It isn't just about the one business. It's about the ecosystem of suppliers, marketers, and consumers that business creates around it.
And in places like the Great Lakes region, which we often refer to as the Rust Belt, this demographic injection is the literal difference between a town slowly fading into municipal bankruptcy and a town finding a robust, sustainable second life in the 21st century.
This is all deeply compelling when we're talking about highly recruited tech workers or entrepreneurial risk takers who cross borders specifically seeking economic opportunity. We can clearly trace the math on how they benefit the host country.
We can.
But we have to ask a harder question. What about people who arrive not for economic opportunity, but who are fleeing for their lives?
Yeah.
Exactly. What about refugees? When we look at resettlement programs, does the economic math change?
It is a vital question because the context of their arrival is completely different. Economic migrants plan their journey. Refugees are forced into it.
Right.
They are often fleeing severe trauma. They frequently do not speak the local language, and they are almost always forced to leave behind their financial assets, their property, and the credentials for their professional degrees.
Right. So my assumption, and I think the assumption of anyone looking at a municipal budget, would be that resettling refugees must be a heavy, ongoing financial burden on a local community.
It's a common concern.
Because you have to provide emergency housing, extensive language classes, trauma-informed medical care, and job training. That requires significant upfront capital from the state or local government.
You are entirely correct about the upfront costs. Resettlement requires a concentrated initial investment. But to understand the true economic impact, the data shows we have to look at a longer timeline. There is a deeply comprehensive NBER study by William N. Evans and Daniel Fitzgerald that addresses this exact fiscal question.
What did they do?
They used vast amounts of data from the American Community Survey to track the economic and social outcomes of refugees in the United States, and they tracked them over a period of several decades.
Oh, so they took the long view. What happens to the math when you stretch the timeline out from a few months to a few decades?
The researchers are very clear that initial labor market integration is slower for refugees compared to other economic migrants for all the reasons you just outlined regarding language and trauma.
That makes sense.
However, over a long enough timeline, typically hitting a turning point around a decade or two, adult refugees become highly productive, deeply integrated members of the economy.
Okay.
The data proves that over the course of their lives in the U.S., they ultimately contribute significantly more in taxes than they receive in initial relocation assistance and public benefits.
That is a staggering finding.
It really is.
It completely reframes the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
It means that refugee resettlement is not a permanent draining subsidy. It's actually a municipal investment with a positive long-term financial yield.
The trajectory of their integration is steeply upward. Once they establish a foundation, they enter the workforce at high rates, they start businesses at rates that often exceed the native-born population, their incomes rise steadily, and their tax contributions grow year over year until they far surpass the cost of their initial integration.
I want to dig into that integration process because a successful transition like that doesn't just happen by magic.
No, it takes work.
There's a deeply social aspect to this that dictates the economic outcome. I was reading to the sources about different models of integration, specifically community sponsorship models.
Yes, the reports from HIS and a very detailed piece from The Guardian regarding a community sponsorship model utilized in Melbourne, Australia, shed a lot of light on the mechanics of how you accelerate that timeline to self-sufficiency.
Explain how that structured community support actually works on the ground, because it sounds very different from just handing someone a government pamphlet and a housing voucher.
It's totally different. In a community sponsorship model, the complex work of integration isn't just left to an overworked, centralized government agency. Local citizens, church congregations, neighborhood associations, local volunteer groups, they actively take on the responsibility of helping a refugee family integrate.
Wow, they get directly involved.
Yes. They pool resources to help them secure stable housing. They practice conversational English with them daily. They navigate the bureaucracy of enrolling their children in local schools. And critically, they use their own established local networks to help the refugees secure employment.
It's essentially providing them with an instant, pre-built social capital network.
That is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And the economic results of this social networking are profound. It turns a humanitarian effort into highly productive economic integration.
Because getting a job is often about who you know.
Right. Think about how most people find jobs. It's often through a friend, a recommendation, a connection. When a refugee has a local guide who can vouch for them to a local employer, helping them overcome the asymmetric information in the labor market, their transition from dependence to self-sufficiency is vastly accelerated.
They get to work faster, they pay taxes sooner, and the community reaps the economic benefit of their labor much quicker.
This raises an important question. If this active sponsorship model works so well and yields such a positive economic return, how should cities and nations be viewing migration as a whole?
That's a big question.
The research strongly suggests that cities need to undergo a paradigm shift. They should stop viewing themselves as passive receivers of migrants, merely managing a crisis, and instead actively work to unlock economic growth by intentionally integrating them.
Actively investing in them.
Right. The research from the Migration Policy Institute reinforces this. They found that cities that actively invest in the economic inclusion of migrants and refugees through credential recognition programs, language access, and business incubators see higher overall growth, stronger tax revenues, and better labor force participation across the board.
Integration is an active, deliberate process.
And when done correctly, it functions as a powerful economic multiplier.
Let's take a breath and look at the vast journey we have been on today. We started at the very peak of the innovation economy, looking at how high-tech patents and the spillover effects of immigrant scientists literally expand the cognitive capacity and output of homegrown inventors.
I'm in the top tier, yes.
And then we moved to the deeply personal foundation of the care economy, seeing how immigrant labor sustains the facilities that allow our aging parents to age with dignity.
Which in turn protects our own family structures and keeps native-born adults in the workforce.
Exactly. We examined the hard macroeconomic realities of labor shortages, debunking the lump of labor fallacy to understand the mechanics of task specialization.
Right, how foreign-born workers taking on manual roles allows native-born workers to transition into management, making the entire business more productive.
We saw how this essential labor keeps housing development moving and keeps the agricultural supply chain from collapsing.
And then we walk down Main Street.
Yes, in Rust Belt towns that have been brought back from the brink of municipal collapse by immigrant entrepreneurs, a revitalization that lifts the economic pessimism and actually boosts native-born business creation as well.
And finally, we looked at the long-term math of refugee resettlement, seeing how an upfront humanitarian investment reliably yields a long-term fiscal surplus when communities actively sponsor and accelerate that integration.
It's a deeply interconnected system. Pulling on one thread affects the entire fabric.
It really does. And the sources leave us with a final, highly provocative thought to consider, drawing from a 2026 article in Le Monde discussing France's current demographic decline.
France's demographics.
France, like much of Europe, East Asia, and increasingly the United States, is facing a rapidly aging population coupled with dropping birth rates.
The demographic math is ruthless and unavoidable. There are simply fewer young people being born to support an exponentially growing elderly population.
And the extrapolation from this data is that if these demographic trends continue across the wealthy world, the fundamental paradigm of how nations view immigration is going to invert entirely.
Invert how?
We might be looking at a very near future where wealthy countries do not spend their political energy debating how to restrict immigration or secure their borders against it.
What will they do instead?
Instead, they will find themselves desperately competing against each other to attract immigrants.
Wow, competing for them.
Yes. In a world defined by steep demographic decline, young, adaptable human capital becomes the most vital, scarce resource on the planet.
That completely flips the script on the entire global conversation. Instead of building walls or implementing quotas, nations might be building international marketing campaigns, offering incentives and streamlining visas to convince global workers to choose their country over a competitor.
It is the logical, inevitable conclusion of the demographic data we have explored today.
It brings us right back to where we started with our weather map.
The radar.
Yeah. When you look at the daily political debate, the storm is loud, it is localized, and it is highly distracting. But underneath all of that noise, those deep, quiet ocean currents are dictating the actual climate.
The movement of people is that current.
It is shaping the foundation of your healthcare system, the commercial vitality of your local downtown, and the technological capacity of the tools you use every single day.
The structural forces are always there doing the work, whether we acknowledge them in the daily debate or not.
We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you walk down your local commercial district, or the next time you hear a loud debate about labor and demographics on the news, we encourage you to look closer at your own community's economy with these unseen structural forces in mind. There is always much more to the story than just the storm.